A few moments later.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Welcome to Samsara. You'll be stuck in the cycle of death and rebirth forever. Or are you? Is there a way out? But before we think of that, we have to understand the cycle. Samsara in Sanskrit means wandering. For Buddhists, samsara is the cycle of death and rebirth, with all beings that ever were, are, or will be wandering along the cycle. In fact, you're actually just experiencing a single rebirth at this very moment. You've had innumerable lives before this, though you're not aware of them. And after you die, you'll be reborn again into another form. You could be reborn as a god, a billionaire, an ant, or as a condemned being in hell. The way that your next life is chosen is pretty much out of your control. No invisible being in the sky dictates where you're born. Rather, it's controlled by karma. While in the West, people like to think of karma as things like getting your coffee spilt if you cut someone off in traffic, that's not how it works. Well, mostly not. Your karma is the aggregation of all the deliberate actions that you've done in this life so far, as well as your previous lives. It can lead to negative consequences later in your life, but it mainly dictates the form into which your next rebirth takes shape. Karma dictates everything from what realm you're born into, we'll get into that later, to your personal traits and how you view the world. So, if you're a shut-in NEET who sees everyone as out to get you, you may have kicked a lot of puppies in a previous life. If, on the other hand, you end up becoming the next Bob Ross, then you probably saved a lot of pets from a lot of fires in a past life. And while this sounds like everything in your current life is controlled by karma, karma actually just controls the major aspects. If you stub your toe or burn your tongue every now and again, that's probably just because of the ambient conditions of the world around you. At this point, you're probably thinking, well, what can I do to avoid becoming a NEET again? Good question. Lucky for you, karma's like a law of physics, and the leading Buddhist research labs have figured out the following. There are 3 types of actions that influence your karma. Physical,
nicely, unless you want
verbal, and mental. What the Buddhists figured out is that the intention behind actions matters a lot more than the actions themselves. For example, when I was in Nara, I accidentally slapped a deer, but that's a story for another time. Anyways, because I didn't know the deer was there when my hand connected to its face, I can't have had bad intentions towards it. As such, the karmic weight of this isn't that bad.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
If, instead, I had gone to Nara on a mission to slap all the deer in sight, then that would have been really bad for my karmic accumulation. Another thing is that if you do something bad and express regret about it, it also lessens the karmic weight. I personally regret slapping my dear friend, so that's a double discount on the karma. Now that you've gotten a basic understanding of karma, we can finally start exploring all the realms that you could be born into. We'll start with the realms of desire, which is where you'll likely spend the vast majority of your time in samsara. Here, there are 6 possible domains. We'll start with the 4 bad ones, so that we can only go up from there. The first domain we'll stop by is the Tiryag domain. This is where all our animal buddies live. Technically, all the domains are pretty much separate, and for the animal domain, the key thing separating it from humans is that the animal realm is mentally separated from ours by state of mind.
Stupid, dumb animal!
You're probably thinking, what's so bad about being an animal? Well, if you're a wild animal like a gazelle, you spend your entire life either living in fear of dying or actively dying. If you're a farm animal, you spend your entire life being extracted for productive value before dying. If you're a pet, you might think you have it good, but you pretty much spend your life at the mercy of your owner. According to Buddhists, the icing on the suffering cake is that you spend your entire life in ignorance, unable to work towards enlightenment. The second domain is the preta domain. This is the domain of the hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts are usually invisible to humans, but in certain mental states, humans will be able to see them. After hearing what I'm about to say, it's usually for the better that you can't see them. Hungry ghosts are the spirits of people who had exceptionally bad qualities in life. This list here is just a few of the possible candidates. Later, the idea of hungry ghosts evolved to also include the spirits of the dead who didn't have proper funeral rites performed for them, including your ancestors. Life as a hungry ghost generally is pretty terrible. Pretas are usually depicted to have crazy large bellies and extremely small throats and mouths, which symbolizes their inability to satisfy their worldly desires in their previous lives. Because of this, they are almost constantly in a state of hunger, and when they do eat, they often compulsively seek out humiliating and disgusting things like human corpses and feces. In several Southeast and East Asian countries, it's believed that there are certain times of year that hungry ghosts can return to the realm of the living. During these times, people have ghost festivals where they systematically put out offerings for hungry ghosts, especially spirits of deceased ancestors, so that they can finally have food in an edible form. Next stop is Naraka, also known as Hell. Don't worry, it's not like Judeo-Christian hell. There are both hot and cold hells. There are 8 levels each of hot and cold hells, each of which is personally tailored to be your optimal punishment, depending on what you did. Another key difference is that if you end up here, you can have the small comfort of knowing that you won't be here for all eternity. Oh no, you'll only be here for anywhere from hundreds of millions to sextillions of human years. One lifetime of punishment in Naraka could last for only a couple million years, but that's the trick, it's only one lifetime. You'll be reborn into that punishment over and over and over again until you've served your sentence. I'll save the details of the tortures of this realm for another time, but a quick summary is that you're tortured while simultaneously being basically the same thing as a hungry ghost. Fun. The last of the 4 bad rebirths is the Asura realm. Asuras are basically big demigods with 3 heads and 3 faces per head and 4 or 6 arms. They aren't subject to any sufferings like the other bad rebirths. In fact, they have much more pleasurable lives than even humans, and are considered a type of heavenly being. Compared to the other bad rebirths, this one is actually quite nice. The problem with this rebirth is that Asuras have a natural inclination to be extremely proud, envious, and warlike. As such, they are always angry and jealous about not being in the proper godly realm. Imagine a Karen who could fly, throw boulders, and loved to fight Starbucks employees instead of scream at them. With this visual in mind, you can understand that they constantly fight each other and are trying to fight the Devas, which is our next destination. Of the 6 rebirths here, the Deva domain is by far the nicest. They even have nicer lives than the Asuras, minus all of the jealousy and murderous tendencies. In fact, those who live in this realm have lives that are so nice that most of them really don't give a shit about anything but themselves. What happens is that they spend their entire lifetimes just chillin', and then when they get reborn, they have no real good karma from this lifetime, so get reborn as something way lower in Samsara. This brings us to our last stop in the 6 domains, the Manusya domain, which you should all know, hopefully, because it's the human realm. I shouldn't have to do a lot of explaining about this. Or do I? Basically, the human realm is the best one to be born into because it's just the right mixture of pleasure and pain. In a lower rebirth, you spend all your time suffering, so it's hard to think about working towards enlightenment. Conversely, in a higher rebirth, you spend all your time relaxing, so you have no incentive to think about enlightenment. Note, though, that a human rebirth usually happens far, far less often than other rebirths, since accumulating that much merit in a lower rebirth is extremely slow. In a higher rebirth, the chances are pretty small that your karma drop is just small enough to get you reborn as a human. Well, as far as I know. Well, that's been our tour of the realms of desire. Beyond this, there are 2 other realms that you can usually only get to once you're pretty far along on the road to enlightenment, so aspiring Buddhas try to skip those rebirths. The first of these is the form realm. This is where the heavenly deities known as Brahmas live. They exist in this weird half-material state where they don't have basic senses and don't experience pleasure or pain. In this realm, there are 4 different grades based on mental state, with a total of 17 to 22 sub-realms within these 4 grades. The final stop on Samsara is the formless realm. This realm is pretty hard to explain since it has no form. All the beings here exist in purely mental states. There are said to be 4 different levels here as well: infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. I think it would look something like this. Now, taking a step back, here's an artist's depiction of the 3 different realms. Well, now that you're aware of your place in this endless cycle of suffering and rebirth, I'll give you some time to have a good existential crisis before we learn more. I'll see you next time. If you have enjoyed this content, please feel free to like and subscribe.